Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And can I just say and echo how lovely it is to be able to speak to people face to face, not over Zoom, not having people yell at you, you're on mute, you know. So it's lovely to be able to meet together to talk about what is a great topic, namely the art of victory and competition in ancient Greece. The reason why I've chosen this particular topic, and as you'll see, it's a really important topic for thinking about the culture of ancient Greece, but the reason why I chose this topic is because it's one of the central themes of an exhibition that I've been working with the National Museum of Australia in Canberra on. So for the last couple of years, I've been working as a consultant with them as the sort of local sort of area expert on this exhibition that's coming from the British Museum of 172 objects from all over the Greek world. And it's themed around the topic of ancient Greeks, athletes, warriors, and heroes. It was originally supposed to open last year, but of course COVID happened. And originally it was supposed to first go to the War Memorial Museum in Auckland, then come to Canberra, and then go to Perth. Sadly, it's had to be rejigged. So in fact, the exhibition is currently open in Perth. It'll then come to Canberra, opening in the 16th of December and be there till May, and then we'll go on to Auckland to finish there. So I haven't seen it yet. As you know, it's impossible to get to West Australia at the moment without doing 14 days quarantine. From what I can see, it looks to be great. I've seen the kind of design that's been set up for the Canberra exhibition. I think they've done a really great job in what they're planning to do and the way they're planning to display the material. In particular, when we look at some of the material, you'll see that there are certain display challenges, and I think what they've decided to do, particularly with some of the small objects, is really quite exciting. So I think it's going to be a great exhibition. I'd encourage you, if we can all travel again, particularly also if Canberra COVID numbers manage to drop, to go down and see it. I think it'll be great. You can probably skip the adult audio tour, which is kind of a bit dull and worthy. I can say that because I wrote it. But the thing that's really fabulous, and if you've got any children, I'd really encourage them, is they've done a really fabulous kids tour, and they've had a couple of really kind of precocious young child actors who kind of take you through the exhibition. So if you've got any kind of grandkids, it's a really great little audio tour to take them through. The objects that we've kind of chosen, I think, really work well for kids. So certainly the kids tour, I think, is great. So it's an exhibition that you can take grandkids to, as well as get, I think, a lot of interesting content yourself. So I'd really encourage you, if you can, to go down to the museum. This is one of essentially three exhibitions that the National Museum of Australia have done in partnership with the British Museum. So the first one was the Rome exhibition, which I'm not sure if you saw a couple of years ago. And then there was an exhibition of indigenous material that was held in Britain, which was the kind of the return match, as it were, in Britain. This is Greece, and then there'll be a next one going of Australian material being shown in the British Museum. So it's part of an exchange that the British Museum and the National Museum of Australia have got going at the moment. But anyway, so what unites athletes, warriors, and heroes? Well, of course, what it is competition. And indeed, arguably there is no more important idea in the Greek world than the spirit of competition. The spirit of competition, as we'll see, and as this exhibition is designed to show, flows through every aspect of Greek life. There's no area of Greek activity in which the Greeks can't turn it into a form of competition. And that perhaps is not breaking any news to you, actually. But if we think about the competitive nature of the Greek world, we discover that, there are competitions in dancing, for example, in potting, in wool spinning, and in autopsy. And this is one of my favourite forms of competition from the ancient Greek world. Competitions in autopsy kick off in about the Hellenistic period. This is autopsy of bodies of animals, not bodies of humans. The Greeks were always a little reluctant to perform autopsies on human bodies, which is quite interesting when you think about the history of Greek medicine, that actually it's a medicine that really up until the 3rd century is done without actually any autopsy of bodies. And it's only really in the Hellenistic period that we start to see autopsies of human bodies. They have some familiarity with, of course, bodies on battlefields and those sorts of things. But the actual physical examination of a corpse is something that is not particularly a Greek practice. But anyway, these Hellenistic competitions in autopsy are kind of fabulous. And that what happens is you have a body of an animal laid out. And then various competing doctors come and sort of rummage around and see who can produce the most exciting thing out of the body of the animal. And it's done essentially by audience applause. So, you reach into your pig and pull out something and everyone gives you a round of applause. Whoever gets the largest round of applause wins. This competition in autopsy actually it keeps on going, so that in fact it continues into the Roman period. And in fact, famously, the author Galen dissects an elephant. And this is one of the most famous dissections and autopsy competitions ever done, was Galen's dissection of an elephant. And here, this is a modern dissection of elephant to give you a sense of what it would have been like. The question that was posed to the rival medics in this competition was: does the heart of an elephant have bones in it? This was one of the live issues in medical thought at the time. And famously, Galen reaches in to the heart of the elephant and pulls out a bone. Now, to this day, no one knows what he's actually pulled out because, in case you didn't know, hearts don't have bones in them. What they suspect is was possibly a calcified deposit that had been around the arteries or something, and he pulls out something solid and bone-like. But anyway, famously, Galen settles the debate, in fact wrongly, in this famous competition in autopsy. There are beauty competitions for boys in Elis, in girls in Arcadia and Lesbos. There's a competition for the best kisser, to be only entered by boys, at the Festival of the Dioclea in Megara. There's competitions in art, in board games and knucklebones, in drama, and athletic and equestrian events. And I've left those kind of 4 to the end because, in fact, those are the 4 that will actually form most of the main themes of the exhibition. So the exhibition has sections devoted to competition in art, competition in board games, knucklebones, drama, and athletics and equestrian events. So why is it that the Greeks were so obsessed about competition? Why is it that competition animates them? Why is it that out of all the cultures of the Mediterranean, it's the Greeks that, for example, develop athletic competitions, right? Why is it that we don't have these kind of competitions and the same culture of competitions in other Mediterranean cultures, but we do find it in the Greeks? Well, that is a question that has puzzled scholars for a long time. Part of the answer, I think, lies in the way in which competition acts as a marker of divine favour. That is to say, that competition allows you to see the will of the gods made manifest. That is to say, that competition is a moment when you can touch the divine. And it's, I think, that kind of theological implications of competition which is so important. And it's important from our very earliest texts. So if one thinks, for example, of the Homeric Iliad, what does it feature? Well, in Book 23 of the Iliad, we of course have the famous funeral games for Achilles' beloved Patroclus, thereby establishing games as a fit subject for epic, and that games should be written in to all epic. Now, what's striking about these games that are held for the funeral of Achilles' beloved Patroclus is the way in which the gods are present in them. And we see that most famously, in fact, the famous chariot race, where the gods descend to assist their particular favourites. For example, Apollo flies down and steals Diomedes' whip. Athena retrieves the whip, gives it back to Diomedes, and then jumps on Eumelus' chariot, breaking it, and thereby assisting her particular favourite. So this idea of the gods are actually there, present, making themselves manifest, and ensuring victory is absolutely crucial and important. And so that idea of competition, of the divine, particularly the divine victory, is something that you'll see flowing through the exhibition in all sorts of ways. There's a strong focus in the exhibition on the cult of Nike, the goddess of victory, and one of the centerpieces of the exhibition is this absolutely fabulous life-size statue of Nike from the 1st century BC. It would have once had, of course, a head. The head would have been carved from a different kind of marble, perhaps a finer kind of marble, allowing greater detail. You can also see that there would have been attachments for the arms as well, again carved possibly from a sort of finer, whiter marble. This whiteness of the marble may, of course, been used to evoke the kind of female skin, the Greek preference for women to have a pale skin over a tan. This life-size statue would have once been an acroterion, that is to say, a roof ornament. And we see these Nikes, this goddess of victory, as a very popular roof ornament. The idea being that she looks like she's kind of almost descended from the heavens and has kind of perched herself at the top of your roof line. Nike was, an important goddess. She's the goddess that guarantees victory. She's the one of the gods who, she's one of the old gods. She assists the Titans. She assists Zeus. In fact, she's the charioteer of Zeus in certain mythological tales. And she's, as I say, represented by a number of works throughout the exhibition. This large, life-size marble statue of the goddess Nike, but also, and I think one of the most exquisite objects in the exhibition, is one of the tiniest. And that is this absolutely exquisite, seriously beautiful, carved gemstone. Essentially, Greek gem carving doesn't get any better than this. This is probably amongst the finest gem carving that we see there. Gem carving kicks off in, there's, some Bronze Age examples. From the 7th century we start to see it, but really it reaches its kind of high point in the sort of 5th and 4th century, and this is really a really fabulous example of it. It's done on a kind of using a sort of drill and a wheel with a sort of powdered slurry of emery to assist in the cutting. The stones that are favoured for cutting are ones that are particularly durable and hard, so your quartzes, so this chalcedony, which is a kind of quartz, is fairly typical. What we see here is the goddess Nike, and there's a relief of the carved stone there, erecting what we call a tropion, that is to say, a trophy. Indeed, the modern word trophy comes from tropion. It's a typical battle victory monument, erected from the armour and shields and weapons of your defeated enemies, often erected at a kind of pivotal point in the course of the battle, where the battle may have turned, for example, and victory was assured. The moment when Nike guaranteed your victory, you would erect one of these victory monuments. And here we see Nike, this winged goddess, erecting the victory. As I say, it's absolutely exquisite. It's only about this big. But just look at the details. I mean, you can see the cheekbones on the face, the musculature on the stomach, the way it goes in, the curvature of the buttocks, even the sort of slight musculature on the arms, the fine details in the flowing cloth. I mean, just an absolutely astonishing bit of gem carving, and one of the real highlights of the exhibition. Flowing through this exhibition is a real focus on high-quality art pieces. And here, what I'm interested in thinking about is the way in which art functioned as a competition in the ancient world, and in particular the impact and importance of art as a competition. One of my favourite stories, it's a story that the Greeks and Romans told. It's almost certainly not true, but it's too lovely a story not to share with you, is of course the great competition between Zeuxis and Parrhasius, the two greatest painters of their day, who decide to enter into competition as to who is the greatest of the painters. And they each paint their masterpieces, bring them out on stage. And Zeuxis goes first, and he unveils his painting, and it's a painting of a bunch of grapes. Grapes so beautiful, so lustrous, such brimming in fertility, that a flock of passing birds comes down and starts to peck at the canvas. They're so taken by these grapes. Well, Zeuxis thinks this has got to be a sign. How could he not be the victor in this competition? So he turns to Parrhasius and he says to Parrhasius, full of confidence, "I'd like to see you top that. Why don't you pull back your curtain and display what you've painted?" At which Parrhasius says, "I've already revealed my work. I painted a curtain." And at that point, Zeuxis is forced to concede defeat, because as he says, my painting fooled an animal, but you, Parrhasius, has painted a painting that has fooled a man. Now, as I say, the story is almost certainly apocryphal, but what I think is important about it is, why are the Greeks telling this story? And what does it tell you about their priorities in thinking about art, and how they imagine art? And they imagine art, first of all, as an exercise in imitating nature, so it shows you their priorities. But it also shows kind of the way in which competition is so important for them, and the way in which competition, outdoing each other, and innovation is how you measure the importance of art. So this is a culture which is going to value change and innovation in art. And the importance of that, I think, becomes really clear when we look at, for example, comparing Egypt with Greece, right? So it's very clear, for example, that when you look at early Greek art, that there is a strong direct influence of Egyptians. So if you look at, for example, a statue like this from the 7th century BC, and compare it to a Greek statue of roughly the same kind of period, what you see is the clear influence of Egyptian style, Egyptian technique on the Greek models. Similar pectoral muscles, singular body posture, similar stance. So the direct borrowing and strong influence on Egypt on Greek art is well known and well established. What's interesting, however, is where these two cultures depart. And here, what I think is interesting is the way in which in Egypt what you're seeing is a culture with a strong focus on stability over innovation. That is to say that one of the things that it prioritizes is in fact stability, that this is an art that is supposed to reassure you, that it's supposed to kind of anchor you in the world, right? This is an art that is about permanence, about stability, about, as it were, the unending cycles. Now, that's and that produces a certain kind of art, you know. So that produces an art, for example, that, you know, doesn't change a lot. So if, for example, you look at a statue like this, you know, from 2400 BC, compare it to a statue like this, and compare the 1800 years that separates between them, right? There's not a huge amount of difference. Now, if you have a culture which has a very different kind of priorities, which thinks that actually changes what we want to see in art, then you actually get a different kind of result. That is to say that in 50 years, that's the difference between these two. And it's not to say that one, you know, particular art form is better than the others. It's rather to say that art always serves its community. And the kinds of priorities that the community has an effect on the kind of art form it produces. So that's, again, one of the reasons why I think, you know, art and high-quality art has been so important in the exhibition. There's a focus on the daily competitions, the art of games, and in particular, again, an absolutely lovely piece, this very fine pair of terracotta knucklebone players from Magna Grecia, from the Italian Greek communities, 4th century BC. Again, just a wonderful bit of modelling. If you just look at the details on it, the details of the faces, the modelling of the little knuckle bones in the hands, really just an absolutely exquisite piece, really just fabulous. What this piece picks up on is, of course, an absolute love affair with knuckle bones that runs through Greek culture. Knuckle bones, you know, we call them knuckle bones. They're actually the ankle bones of sheep or goat. In fact, the ankle bones of the antelope were particularly prized. We find them in all sorts of shapes. So there are ones carved from gold, silver, bronze, ivory, glass, rock crystal, marble, wood, terracotta. It seems to have been a popular game throughout the Mediterranean. Romans play it, Greeks play it. We've even have sets of knuckle bones found in Egyptian tombs. The Persians seem to play knuckle bones. So it's as it were, a unifier throughout the Mediterranean. They're given often, for example, as prizes to school children for performing well. There are a number of Greek vase paintings showing, as it were, children receiving bags of knuckle bones as prizes. Essentially, the way that there are sort of two ways of playing it. One way is to kind of to sort of throw one knuckle bone up in the air and have some on the ground and see how many you can grab before that one falls to the ground. Another thing to do with them is to throw them onto the ground and then see the way in which they fall, what sides particularly fall, and each side has a different kind of points prize, and that allows you to work out a score, so whoever gets the highest can do that. You can gamble that way. You can also tell your fortune that way as well. So we have, for example, a number of dice and knucklebone oracles where you throw the knucklebones or you throw the dice, and that you get a number, and then you can read off your score and see, you know, what kind of man you will end up marrying, whether you should make a sea voyage, any of those sorts of things. So knucklebones are really important. this is going to be in the exhibition. It's a really lovely little vase, crater, showing in fact the god Eros playing knucklebones, and in fact he's so lost in his knucklebones he doesn't notice this rather attractive young man who's come to crown him with a wreath. He's too busy working out what his score is. And indeed you can see, if you look at the details, you can see that he's actually balancing a couple of knucklebones on the back of his hand, which again is another way of playing knucklebones. We often find them in the tombs of graves of children. They're a common gift there. As the terracotta shows, women and knucklebones are indeed a very popular combination. We even have ancient writers complaining about young girls and their knucklebone addictions. There's a phrase, never get between a woman and her knucklebones. So these, particularly are regarded as a very feminine kind of pastime, and we can see, again, some statues of women as knucklebone players. Again, some women there. We've also got in the exhibition some very nice jewellery, which again features female knucklebone players in them. So some lovely earrings with female knucklebone players there. So the kind of competition of daily life is one of the things that we've got going on in the exhibition. The other area, of course, is dramatic competition. And there's a focus on Greek drama and drama as competition in the exhibition. Again, some lovely pieces are coming out for this. This Roman copy of a Greek original portrait head of the Greek playwright Euripides is coming on again. One of the highlights of Greco-Roman portraiture. A really fabulous piece. And this idea of theatre as competition is really worth stressing. That is to say that we need to always remind ourselves that drama was a form of competition in the ancient world. People didn't go to plays just to watch a play as a form of entertainment, but rather they did it as part of a religious festival, they did it as part of a competition. And so kind of theatre was a sort of religious event for the ancient Greeks. They would, have these enormous processions in honour of the god Dionysus, which would meet outside the city walls, process through the city down to the theatre of Dionysus. These processions often involved all sorts of processions of phalloi, of people dressed as worshippers of Dionysus. The procession would then arrive at the theatre of Dionysus, where some sacrifice would be made to the god. This, of course, is what the theatre of Dionysus looks like these days. This, of course, is the Roman rebuilding of the theatre. This is probably what it more would have looked like in the time of the kind of classical Greek plays. It's very much more simple, wooden benches, more simple kind of scenery and staging. What I wanted to focus on, however, was, as I say, the dramatic competition and sort of the competition aspect of it. So the way the competition would work is in late summer, playwrights would apply to be chosen to compete in the Dionysia, this dramatic festival of Dionysus. And the chief magistrate, the eponymous archon, would choose 3, and he'd appoint a choreagos, a drama sponsor, to provide financial support to cover the costs. And this, again, is a reminder that, of course, in ancient Athens, everything was done largely through philanthropy. Private individuals co-opted by the state to pay for large state expenses. of which this was one. The dramatists would organise a chorus. From the mid-5th century, the magistrates would also choose the actors for the dramatist as well. So when you were entering this competition, particularly from the mid-5th century, you wouldn't choose your actors. Your actors would be appointed to you by the state in this competition. Now, what I find absolutely fascinating is the judging process for how they determine who won the dramatic competition. So this is the process. So at a council meeting, a list of names of potential judges was drawn up from each Athenian tribe. There are 10 Athenian tribes. So a list of potential judges is submitted by each tribe. These names were then sealed into jars, 1 jar per tribe. At the contest, a single name was drawn out from each of these jars. So that would then give you 10 judges. So you've got 10 judges, 1 per tribe. At the end of the competition, each judge wrote his winner and his order of merit on a tablet. And then these 10 tablets were then placed into a jar. Then the eponymous archon, the chief magistrate of Athens, draws out 5 of those 10 tablets. And on the basis of those 5, he declares the winner. Now, what I think is really worth observing here is the way in which this is also random. You can't determine who's going to be pulled out from the original jar, who's going to be one of the final 10. And even if you could determine who's going to be one of the final 10, not all of those final 10 votes will count. Only half of them will count. So first of all, this is, has some practical benefits. That is to say that it stops, people being able to bribe judges or have judges being influenced by people. But more importantly, and I think this is the really crucial bit, is of course this is the moment where you let in the gods, right? This allows fate to take a hand in deciding which of the judges will be chosen, which of those judges will count. So if you think back to my initial point about the way in which competition is a way of letting in the gods, then we see it in action here. So what did you win? If you were the victorious dramatist and sponsor, you were crowned with a wreath in the theatre. From the mid-5th century, there was also a prize for the best actor, including the right to be automatically chosen for next year's performances. But above all, what you're winning is honour and prestige. And this is the really important thing about so many Greek competitions, is the way in which actually it's about the honour and prestige, and that idea that you've been, as it were, chosen as special, that is so important. People were very keen to advertise their victories, and we know that people erect monuments to their victories in the various competitions that are held in this. Now, we have a rather wonderful example of one of these monuments to advertise a victory, which is the Lysipides monument. Now, this wasn't for a dramatic competition. It was held. It was a victory for another kind of competition at the Dionysian Dithyramb. But what we have here is this rather fabulous monument that was erected in honour of the victor. This is it in Athens. Does anyone know where this is? Sydney. So this is, in fact, the Sydney copy in the Sydney Botanic Gardens. So this monument, you can see one in the top of the hill in Edinburgh. It became a very sort of popular architectural type. Okay, moving on. The other thing, and perhaps the final element in the exhibition, is a focus, of course, on athletics and equestrian competitions. And again, some really lovely pieces are coming out for it. The really fabulous bit of sculpture known as the Vaison Diadoumenos, the victor tying his garland. Again, just a wonderful piece of Greek modelling, particularly the fine anatomy of the buttocks, the strong abdominal crest works. I mean, it's a really fabulous piece. So important in the history of Western art. So that is coming. Another one that's coming, which I'm rather glad that they chose this one. So this is the statue known as the Discophorus, the youth holding the discus holder. And I was glad they chose this one. I was worried that they were going to choose that terrible bit of kitsch known as the discus thrower, which you see him. I mean, we've all seen him. He's overworked, and he's also kind of impossible in terms of his musculature. This one, I think, is a much nicer one. It's a much less dramatic sculpture, but I think it's kind of wonderful. It's an athlete just about to compete. And it's that sort of pensive, reflective moment before competition. It lacks the kind of dynamism and the energy of the discus thrower. But I think in its kind of quietness and in its beauty, I think it's a really wonderful piece that I think gets often overshadowed by the discus thrower, particularly in the British Museum. And it's rather nice to have it here by itself so that we can properly appreciate it. The other move that I think is quite nice in terms of the exhibition, and I think this is, and what I like about the way in which they've done the athletics, is that they've deliberately chosen to move away from the Olympic Games, which is a kind of area that people already know. Every 4 years, right? We revisit it again, and instead, what they've decided to do is focus on a athletic competition that is perhaps deserves better to be known, which is the Panathenaea, which is the great festival of Athena in Athens, which also had an important athletic component to it. And it's a way of giving you a sense of just how, the athletic competition kind of permeates all the different kinds of Greek cultures and the different forms that it could take. So just to give you a little talk about the Panathenaea, your standard format for a Greek festival is processions, sacrifices, and contests. And the Panathenaea begins with this grand procession. Well, before that, the night before the procession, you have, of course, this really wonderful tradition of the torch race. This is a torch race that happens the night before the procession for the Panathenaea, and it involves young men gathering torches from the altar of Prometheus at the Academy and running through the night to lay them at the altar of Athena on the Acropolis. Again, some of the vases showing the torch race are in the exhibition. It's, of course, this which is the inspiration for the torch race in the Olympic Games. So the Olympics, as I'm sure you know, never had a torch race. Right? That was, in fact, an entirely Nazi invention, invented for the Berlin Olympics of '36. Prior to that, there'd never been a torch race before. This was picked up, but it was inspired by the torch races not of the Olympic Games, but in fact of the Panathenaic Games that were being evoked there. The torch race is followed by dances and dawn chorus. The following day, Athena gets new clothes. They process with new clothes for the statue of Athena on the Acropolis. This procession for the Panathenaea is probably what's depicted on the Parthenon frieze, and I should tell you now, no Parthenon material is coming to this exhibition, so there's no Parthenon material in the exhibition. But following the procession, there would have been sacrifices. a whole lot of cattle are done. But then come the contests. And the contests for the Panathenaea take a number of forms. There are musical contests. So we have them involving recitations of Homeric texts, the performance of the kithara, the large lyre, and the aulos, the flute. And these competitions actually had quite substantial prize money. So the winning kithara player, for example, received a gold crown worth about 1,000 drachma, which, if you think about, the standard thing that's said is that a drachma is equivalent to a day's wages. That may or may not be right, but it's roughly the right order of magnitude. That means that 1,000 drachmas is probably about the equivalent to 3 years' wages for the winner of the kithara. And then it goes all the way down to, in fact, the fifth place winner, who gets effectively a year's wages for coming fifth. So some quite significant prizes. Importantly also, what you also get, in addition to some cash prizes, were some prizes that were some sacred oil. These were presented to you, in fact, these rather fabulous, very distinctive vase types. These are Panathenaic amphorae, which show on one side Athena Promarchos, Athena, the goddess leading into battle, and then the other side you have the depiction of the competition for which you won the prize. So this is equivalent to like the medal that you get. Interestingly, we have a number of these in the exhibition. They come from none of them, as far as I can remember, actually come from mainland Greece. They're all from, in fact, victors from outside the Greek world who came to the Panathenaic Games to compete and then took their Panathenaic amphorae home. And often these were found in tombs. The oil in which they contained was supposedly descended from the plant, the tree, that in fact had been planted by Athena herself. So if you remember your mythology, and it's the story that's on the west pediment of the Parthenon, the famous competition between Athena and Poseidon as to who would be the patron god of Athens, and they each offer a gift to Athens. Poseidon offers a spring of salt water. No one gets terribly excited by that. Athena instead offers an olive tree. And the Greeks believed that in fact actually there were descendants of these olive trees that you could identify in the landscape. And indeed, if you ever were to cut one down or molest one or knock it over, it was punishable by death. That is to say that you were brought before the Areopagus and tried for it. So, and it's from, in fact, these trees that the oil was harvested for the Panathenaic amphorae. And as I say, we've got a number of these in the exhibition. This one here showing the pentathletes is rather good, and you can see the various sports that make up the pentathlon, the long jump, symbolised by the jumping weights, the discus, the javelin, and running race and wrestling as the ancient pentathlon. The Panathenaic Games also included equestrian contests as well, and we have a number of those represented in the exhibition, including, for example, this competition where young men would ride past and attempt to spear a target, chariot racing. This one here is a really interesting depiction, and it's included in the exhibition. It's of a young man competing in a competition known as the Apobates. Now, the Apobates is an interesting competition. It's a competition, an equestrian competition conducted in armour, or at least holding a shield, in which you ride half the length of the course, and then you leap off, and then you and your horse run to the finishing line together. And so it's this kind of leaping off of the horse. It's fabulously dangerous, but also regarded as one of the really kind of great elite sports. So if you're one of the gilded youth of Athens, the Apobates is the kind of thing that you want to spend your time doing. And as I say, there aren't many depictions of it. This one here is normally identified as one. Here's the young man. This is normally identified as the finishing post. He's leapt off his horse, and there is Nike ready to award him his victor's crown, and he's carrying his bit of armour there. There's also a Pyrrhic dance contest, and possibly, and again this is a bit debated, there are certainly boat races at the Piraeus associated with it. Whether they're actually part of the formal competition is a bit debated. And the reason why I really like the fact that the Panathenaea was decided to be chosen was because it gives you a sense of that the Olympic Games was not the only model around. And that actually you could have these competitions which would involve kind of reciting Homer alongside athletics and equestrians and dance and boat racing, right? That there were these kind of multiple models of what competition could do, and I think the Panathenaea brings it out. Well, I've spoken for far too long, so I'm going to finish off with my favourite object in the exhibition, and it's this one here. So it's the Amazon frieze from the mausoleum of Halicarnassus. And this is, I think, just one of the most wonderful bits of sculpture in the exhibition. The mausoleum of Halicarnassus, of course, is one of the great seven wonders of the ancient world. The tomb for the great king Mausolus of Caria, one of the great figures of the 4th century BC. And what I like about this sculpture is that it seems to me so typically emblematic of what Greek art is about. And in particular, what I want to focus on are these particular figures on the side of the relief panel here. So what we see here is a Greek fighting an Amazon, and the Amazon is there on her knees with her hand reached out, begging for mercy. Mercy that she is not going to get. His sword is drawn back, her throat is exposed. We're seeing her at her final moments. We're seeing her about to face her doom. We're seeing, as it were, that snapshot before death is about to fall. So drama, tension, pathos here. But what I love is here. What he doesn't see is that in his moment of triumph, there is behind him an Amazon ready to knock him to his doom. That is to say, that this is an image which is not about victory, or rather it's about the precariousness of victory. It's about the fact that that moment when you think you've achieved all you can, when you are at your greatest, is also the moment that doom is just around the corner. An image and a message that we see played out in Greek tragedy, an image that seems to me so fundamentally Greek. And we see it, I think, particularly in relief when we compare this kind of depiction of battle art, when we compare it, for example, what else is happening in the Mediterranean. That is, that if you think about the other kinds of representations of battle that you find either amongst the Achaemenids in Persia or amongst the Egyptians, it's triumphalist. It's about, your enslaved, defeated, conquered opponents lied out in chains before you, or their heads tied together ready for decapitation, right? So this is an art form that is triumphalist in terms of its representation of battle. Or if we think about what's happening in the Near East, for example, again, a depiction of battle which is all about the triumph of the king. The defeated enemies impaled on spikes. I think this one's a good comparanda because we have, again, the same throat-slitting moment. But there's no one here. There's no one to deprive him of his moment of victory. You are supposed to celebrate and enjoy this moment of gore, rather than, as it were, contemplate the fragility of your humanity. And I think in that kind of way in which Greek art constantly puts the human at its very centre, I think we see perhaps its genius. That's, I think, why I love that work so much. It is also, I think, wonderful because it introduces us to perhaps one of the most interesting women of the 4th century, namely the woman who was responsible for the construction of the mausoleum of Halicarnassus. Mausolus, of course, gets all the credit, but of course he doesn't do the tomb. He might have planned the tomb, but it's actually his wife Artemisia who is responsible for doing the tomb. And I thought I'd finish off on this story because I think it's a lovely story about Artemisia. So Artemisia becomes famous in antiquity for her kind of devotion to her husband, and we see that devotion in the erection of the mausoleum, but more importantly in what she does with the ashes of her husband, because she can't bear to be separated from her husband. And so what she does is she takes the ashes and puts a spoonful of ashes into her cup of wine every day, and then drinks the ashes so that Mausolus will never be separated from her. And I rather love this idea. I often wonder, what do you do with ashes, right? I mean, kind of, having them as a sort of sprinkle on your breakfast cereal or whatever certainly appeals. So look, I hope that's given you a sense of the exhibition, of some of the ideas, some of the works that are going to be coming out. As I say, I think it's going to be a really wonderful exhibition, and I really do encourage you to come and have a look at it. So thank you. Right.
Was gambling part of the picture, and was it for slaves or citizens? And where were the slaves if they were even involved in this festival?
Right, good. So those are all great questions. So yes, gambling is huge, and in fact, there's a lot of anxiety in Athens about the kind of amount of gambling that the young men will get up to. There are gambling dens. They involve, cockfights, dice games, knuckle bones, betting on the outcome of horse races, all sorts of things feature in terms of gambling, and often quite large wagers too. There are a number of stories about young men who lose their entire patrimony in gambling. So that's important. In relation to slaves, a couple of things. I mean, one thing that we do know is that slaves do gamble. And in particular, I think one of the things that we often misunderstand about the nature of ancient slavery is just the amount of autonomy that slaves have, particularly, for example, public slaves in Athens. So there are a whole lot of slaves who are owned by the state. And they effectively live independent lives. They are able to rent premises, and indeed one of them, actually, we even know runs a gambling den. So he's a kind of casino owner on the side of as well being as well as being a public slave. So yes, yeah.
Just a final supplement. Coming from the line of my grandfather was a gambler.
Right.
Was it a profession? Was it considered a skill, or was it just turned out for the profession? Do you know if it was a
Yeah, so there's no one who, as it were, makes their fortune professionally as a gambler. So no, there's not. It's not a kind of role like that, and indeed, no. I mean, it's not a thing. So.
Can I ask you about the origins of the competitiveness and where it came from? There's a line from Hesiod where he says there's two stripes: the bad in people, the bad stripe which induces war, but the good stripe which induces competitiveness and the seeking glory.
Yeah.
Is that part of the story? Where does this competitiveness come from?
Yes, yeah. So I think that's certainly part of it. I think it's a culture which is obsessed by personal honour and glory. And competition, exemplifies that. You win at someone else's expense, and it's literally, zero-sum competition. So I think that's certainly part of it. It's a kind of machismo, a kind of masculinity based on, competing against your fellows. People often, wonder whether things like, for example, the topography of Greece doesn't factor into this, the way in which, for example, city-states are, independently competing against each other. There's so many ways in which kind of the meagreness of the resources makes competition important. The kind of masculinity that's operational, the theology about how the gods work and make themselves manifest. I think all of these things come together to explain it.